Well, I'm going to share a little bit about my life. As most of you know, I didn't become a sister until I was 46. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about happened to me before I moved to Minneapolis. Actually, there are only maybe 3 things that I'll say in terms of the time limit. The first one I want to share is when I was living outside of Detroit, I helped to plan a conference, a Peace and Justice conference, and Daniel Berrigan was the main speaker. And he was going to be spending the weekend at the rectory in our neighborhood. And I was assigned to go pick him up at Detroit Metro Airport. So I did that. And I don't know if anybody's ever been, Bill, you've been to that airport, it's pretty big. And I was downstairs looking where he would come in with his luggage. And I'm looking around and looking around and looking around, and I didn't see anybody that I thought was Daniel Berrigan. And I kind of walked around for a while, and a fair amount of time had passed. And I saw a man sitting over on one of those seats in the airport. He had on a fisherman's sweater. He was kind of a tiny man. He's very small. And I thought, gee, that face looks a little familiar. So I went up and I said, hi, I'm Sue Homeyer. And he said, oh, I'm pleased to meet you. I'm Dan Berrigan. And he stood up, and he's about 5'7". And I was kind of taken back because in my mind, he was huge. I mean, he was the peace and justice movement in the 60s for me. And how could he be this tiny little man in the corner in an oversized fisherman's sweater? I really did not understand. And over the course of the weekend, we had many parties at the rectory, and he loved scotch, I found out. And we were talking, and I said, Daniel, I have to tell you, when I picked you up at the airport, I was really expecting this social justice giant. And he looks right at me and he says, Sue, we're all big-time people. And that phrase has stuck with me for my whole life. And in God's eyes, we are all big-time people. We are all called to holiness. We all have dignity. We all have challenges. We're all beloved children of God. So that's my Daniel Berrigan story. Next thing I want to share is something I got in an email this week, talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her holiness is steeped in the fact that as a first-century Galilean woman, she simply recognizes that God is doing great things in and through her. Isn't this what all disciples are called to? And I want to posit that that's the holiness that we are all called to, is recognizing who we are and doing our best to do that. Mary certainly stands with anyone and everyone, past, present, or future, who recognizes and honors that God works wonders in and through individuals who allow their ordinariness to be the stuff of radical holiness. And I want to share about a former student I had. I taught 9th grade. And it was English. A lot of 9th graders aren't crazy about grammar. And I was out in the middle of nowhere in the country in Illinois teaching. And most of the students were the children of pig and cow farmers. And one of my favorite students was named Mark Williams. And Mark would come in late for class almost every morning, and he'd be wearing his grungy jeans. They were pretty fragrant. You know, he'd walk by my desk, and I'd say, Mark's here. And you'd look down, and he would have on his work boots, and there would be cow shit on them. That's what you'd expect, you know, because he'd rush in from doing chores at home. And one day he didn't come in to school, and I thought, well, this is really peculiar. Well, on my free period, I got a note from the school secretary that said, call Mr. Williams at home. So I called thinking Mark was sick, and I asked for his dad. And Mark was at home. And I said, did you call me? And he said, yes, I did, Miss Homeyer. I wanted to tell you that it's calving season. And my dad really needed me this morning because one of our cows was having some great difficulty delivering, and I had to really help out at home. And I know I missed your class, and I knew you would understand. And at that moment, I was really hearing someone who was a holy person. He was a person who was caring for nature, he was caring for God's creatures, and he had his own priorities. You know, the new life of this calf was much more important than participles and gerunds, I'm sure, that day, as well as in the life of his family, because they supported themselves in this very, very humble and simple way. This brings us back to the humility of Mary that I started with. And I just want to close by reading this brief little ending to what I started with. The Canticle of Mary, the Magnificat, which we say every day in our evening prayer, it really is a celebration of all creation. It's a celebration of Christ's body. It's a celebration that cries out for justice, inclusivity, compassion, until that final day comes. And I think to be holy means to be holy as Mary was, knowing who she was, being the one that she was called to be, and sometimes having to do it radically. So that's holiness in my life. Thank you.